Boston, Massachusetts, Chinatown, the only Chinatown in New England. This is where the deadliest massacre in Boston history occurred. In the early morning hours of January 12, 1991, 3 gunmen were buzzed into an underground gambling den at 95 Tyler Street in Chinatown. Once inside, they immediately shot and killed the doorman and then proceeded inside where they shot execution-style 5 men that were sitting at a mahjong table playing cards. Of the 3 gunmen, only 2 would ever be caught, and a motive would never actually be established for the killings. The gambling den in the basement of 85 Tyler Street was managed by a guy named Yu Man Young. It was illegal, so not public. You had to know someone to get in. This place was sophisticated for the time, though. They had a live feed viewed from a monitor inside so they could see who was ringing to come inside. This is especially huge because it means whoever did this, they were recognized and they were let in. This den was run by the Ping On Gang of Boston. Some background on this gang, it was started by a guy named Stephen Tees. He was born in 1950 in Hong Kong. He grew up there and was part of the 14K Triad. Now this crime organization, 14K Triad, was based in Hong Kong, but it's international and still active today, which is crazy. Stephen rose to the top fast, and he gave himself the nickname of Tian Long, which means Sky Dragon. But people also called him Godfather. What's interesting is people that knew him from Chinatown would say in interviews that he was a good guy. They saw him as a protector of Chinatown. Even though his gang was running Chinatown through extortions, prostitution, drugs, etc., he was like a man of the people. He came to Boston from Hong Kong in the 70s when he was in his 20s and started the Ping On Gang in 1982. Things were good until 1984 when he was put in jail for a year and a half because he refused to answer questions about a ceremony he attended with other triad leaders in Hong Kong. Normally, that would be fine, but he was subpoenaed, so refusing to talk meant jail time. This is when stuff really breaks down and the Chinatown massacre starts to become inevitable. The Ping On leader would be let out of jail in 1986, but by this time, the gang did not have the control that it once had. Rival Vietnamese gangs were all vying for power in Boston. Stephen actually had to negotiate a peace with a rival Vietnamese gang. Now, this wasn't great, but he still got to maintain some power with Ping On, and most importantly, he still had respect. For the next few years, Stephen would spend his time between Boston and Hong Kong, all the while still maintaining control and overseeing operations of the Ping On. The first seeds of violence were planted in December 1988 when a bad business deal between a Ping On member and rival gang leader Dai Kung Liu and his associate Chow Ming resulted in Liu and Chow Ming demanding $30,000 from the Ping On for counterfeit green cards that were never delivered. Ping On leader Stephen Tees was actually able to negotiate with Liu on the price down to $15,000, but when Liu asked for the payment to be made at Stephen's own restaurant, Kung Fu, this absolutely infuriated him. To pay a rival in his own restaurant would humiliate him and make him lose face. He actually screamed, "Have I died?" He was so mad that only weeks later, he ordered a hit on Liu and associate Chow Ming. But the shooters failed to kill them. In fact, they fired at the 2 men for a good 30 to 60 seconds and didn't even hit them. A few days later, on January 2nd, 1989, Stephen fled to Hong Kong because he knew retaliation was coming. And high-ranking Ping On members knew this was coming. So during this time, Stephen comes back a few times in 89 to briefly meet with his lieutenants, but then goes back to Hong Kong, leaving associate Michael Kwong in charge of running operations. Well, that didn't last because in August of 89, Michael Kwong was assassinated in his own restaurant. Stephen didn't even come back for the funeral, probably because the danger, but still, he didn't plot revenge, nothing. This is where it gets weird because this was in August of 1989. Stephen is in Hong Kong where he stays, and revenge is finally exacted in the early hours on January 12, 1991 on Liu. Years later, Friday night at the gambling den started out normally. Manager Yu Man Young showed up around midnight and was led into the basement by Chung Hwa Sun, who acted as a doorman for the operation. According to Young, when he arrived, there were 5 men present at the table playing cards. Van Tran, Tong Dun, Ah Bi, Liu, his associate Man Chung. But at 2 a.m., A man named Pak Wing Lee arrives. Tong Dun leaves. At 2:30, one of the killers arrives for the first time, Siny Van Tram, with a man named David Lam. They had been drinking earlier that night at a strip club. Minutes later, he leaves alone. According to Young, Siny Van Tram would return shortly after with two others, who would later be identified as the other gunmen, Hung Pham and Nam Pham. Hung Pham was leading the way in and immediately shot the doorman, Chung Hwa Sun, 3 times in the head as soon as he opened the door. They announced that they were there to rob the place and immediately told everyone to put their hands behind their heads. Liu and his associate, Man Chung, knelt on the floor, putting their hands up. Van Tran put his head on the table. David Lam crouched down behind the table, and Ah Bi and Lee hid under it. The manager of the den, Young, testified that Hung Pham shot Liu 2 times in the head, while Siny Van Tran shot Liu's associate Man Chung 2 times in the head also. Van Tran, the man who put his head on the table, was shot in the head and killed by Siny Van Tran. The 2 men have no relation to each other, by the way. Afterwards, Siny Van Tran kills the guy that he came in with hours earlier, David Lam, shooting him 2 times in the face and once in the chest as he tried to get away out the back. One of the players that survived was Pak Wing Lee. He would later tell investigators that after David Lam was shot, he felt Hung Pham place a gun up against the back of his head. He begged for his life and claims he heard the sound of a gunshot and then nothing. The bullet missed his brain, and miraculously, he survived to be a key witness. Young would testify that the killers ran out of bullets before they could shoot him or Abi. And ultimately, the 3 gunmen fled, followed by Young and Abi, although they went in different directions. After being shot in the head, Pak Lee would wake up around 4 a.m. and drag himself through the back door to a parking lot where he would get noticed by passersby, who then notified security at the nearby New England Medical Center. The shooters would end up going to Atlantic City in the days after the massacre on a gambling bender, and then they fled to China on the same flight out of Philadelphia a few weeks later. It was really as if these men just disappeared. That is until the early 2000s when 2 of the men, Siny Van Tram and Nam Pham, would be arrested in China on unrelated drug charges. They would be held in a Chinese prison for 2 years before being extradited to Boston through Hong Kong. Both of them would deny to investigators any involvement in the killings. They would only admit to being present in the gambling den that night, but not pulling the trigger, despite witness accounts that they did in fact each kill multiple victims. But what about the 3rd killer, Hung Pham? He's the one that got away. He still has not been apprehended to this day, and there were suspicions that he was actually the leader of the group. Hung Pham was also close with Ping An gang leader Stephen Tees. They made several trips from Hong Kong to Boston together. Those that knew him would say that he was very flashy. He liked the finer things in life, expensive cars, and he loved the lifestyle that he led. He made it known that he was so grateful to Stephen for allowing him to make so much money in this crime underworld. On top of Hung Pham's deep loyalty to Stephen and the Ping An gang, both of the other killers had worked for Stephen at some point or another. Although there was never a motive officially declared, I think it's obvious that it has something to do with revenge. All 3 of the killers worked for Stephen, and Stephen's rival Liu was playing cards in a gambling den that was previously controlled by Stephen's gang, Ping An. I don't think it's a coincidence that Liu was killed while he was there. I also think it's convenient that they didn't kill the club manager Young because he had been affiliated with Ping An managing the gambling den for years. I think when Siny Van Tram first came into the den with David Lam and saw that Liu was there, he realized it was a prime opportunity to get the revenge. That's why he left and got the 2 other killers, and they came back to finish the job. It does seem a little crazy to me that they would seek out revenge for Stephen, like almost 2 years removed from anything when it had seemed like Stephen had moved on. But it just goes to show how loyal they were to him and to the Ping An gang. It definitely changed Chinatown forever. It brought to light the crime and violence that was happening on the streets. It was brutal killings that happened in the middle of the night, and it surprised everyone. The Boston Chinatown Massacre was a case that I hadn't really heard of, which is surprising because I consume a lot of true crime. And the fact that the motive was never officially declared, it's kind of weird to me because it seems pretty obvious that it's for revenge, right? I mean, it's definitely gang related. And one of the killers is still on the loose after all these years. It seems like the crime was straightforward, but at the same time, it's still shrouded in mystery. He hasn't been caught, nothing's been officially declared. It's just, I don't know, it's curious. Let me know what you think.